Smoke rose above Rome in 410 AD. For 800 years, no foreign army had crossed its walls. 800 years without a breach, and in a single week, that illusion collapsed. We're taught that Rome fell because barbarians invaded. That version is simple, and it's wrong. The barbarians didn't destroy Rome. They revealed what was already broken. When the Visigoths, led by Alaric I, slipped through the Salarian Gate, they didn't find a dead empire. They found a city still impressive, but quietly straining under its own weight. Temples still stood, markets still buzzed, senators still argued in marble halls, but the foundations beneath all of it were weakening. The shock of 410 wasn't just military. It was psychological, it was spiritual, it was existential. St. Augustine wrote The City of God, trying to make sense of the catastrophe. Romans blamed fate, religion, each other. Anything that made the moment feel less impossible. But the deeper truth was simpler. Rome had been eroding for generations. The sack wasn't the fall, it was the reveal. And to understand what really happened, we don't start with swords. We start with silver. Empires run on logistics. Logistics run on money. And money runs on trust. For centuries, the backbone of Roman commerce was the silver denarius, more than 90% pure when it first appeared. It was reliable, predictable, trusted from Britain to Syria. But empire is expensive. By the 3rd century, Rome was straining under its own size. Vast borders to defend, hundreds of thousands of soldiers to pay, roads, ports, aqueducts to maintain, a ballooning administrative class. Instead of slashing spending or risking revolt through heavy taxation, emperors chose a quieter path. They diluted the currency. At first, just a little, then more, then aggressively. Under Nero, purity dipped. By the mid-3rd century, coins were mostly bronze with a thin silver coating. Some contained less than 5% silver. They looked valuable, but they weren't. More coins were minted, each one worth less than the last. Prices climbed. Soldiers demanded higher pay. Merchants raised costs. Citizens hoarded older coins. Confidence thinned. By 270 AD, inflation was so severe that trade warped across regions. In some places, people quietly returned to barter. Diocletian tried to stop the bleeding with the edict on maximum prices in 301 AD. He fixed wages and prices across the empire. Violators faced death. It didn't matter. No law can force people to trust money they no longer believe in. When currency loses credibility, coordination collapses with it, and the economic cracks were only the beginning. As Rome expanded, it grew more complicated. Complicated systems need managers. Managers need offices. Offices need money. By the 4th century, the imperial bureaucracy had multiplied into layers upon layers. Prefects, vicars, tax assessors, military supply officers, regional governors reporting to other regional governors. By the late Empire, even officials struggled to understand the hierarchy they served in. The army alone devoured a massive share of the imperial budget. Frontiers stretched thousands of miles: Britain, the Rhine, the Danube, the deserts of the East. Every mile needed men. Every man needed pay. Meanwhile, in Rome, grain distributions fed huge portions of the population. What began as emergency relief had become expected, a permanent institution. To sustain all of this, taxes intensified. Imagine being a farmer visited twice in one season by tax collectors demanding payment in debased coin. Some walked away from their land. Others bound themselves to wealthy estates for protection, shrinking the independent tax base. A shrinking revenue pool supporting an expanding state. Expansion had once fueled Rome's momentum, but expansion had stopped, and a machine that cannot grow must restructure. Rome did not restructure. But bureaucracy wasn't Rome's deadliest enemy. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome burned through more than 20 emperors. Most didn't retire peacefully. Many were assassinated. Some ruled for months, a few for weeks. Generals were declared emperor by their own troops. Rival claimants marched on Rome. Legions fought each other instead of guarding borders. Civil war became normal. Imagine being a merchant in Gaul. Who do you pay taxes to? Which currency will hold value next year? Which laws will survive the next coup? Political instability destroys confidence faster than any foreign enemy. Centuries earlier, Tacitus warned that concentrated power breeds fear, and fear breeds instability. Much later, Edward Gibbon would describe Rome's fall as a long, slow decay, not a sudden collapse. Historians argue over causes, but they agree on this. Rome was politically fragile long before it was militarily defeated, and loyalty, once Rome's greatest strength, was about to fracture. In Rome's early centuries, citizens filled the legions. Military service was civic duty, but over time, recruitment shifted. Border tribes became auxiliaries. Entire groups were settled inside the empire in exchange for military service. It was practical. Rome needed manpower, but loyalty became layered. Were these soldiers fighting for Rome, or for the commanders who led them? Some generals negotiated independently with outside groups, acting less like officers of the state and more like regional power brokers. Armies followed leaders, not institutions. When Alaric I marched toward Italy, he wasn't a stranger. He had once operated inside Rome's own military system. The line between insider and outsider had blurred. This wasn't simply invasion. It was fragmentation made visible, and pressure was building. In 378 AD, at the Battle of Adrianople, Rome suffered one of its worst defeats. An emperor died on the field. The illusion of invincibility cracked even further. Then, in 410, Alaric entered Rome. The city was looted for 3 days, symbolically devastating, strategically survivable, psychologically irreversible. The Western Empire limped on for decades, weakened, unstable, but still functioning, until 476 AD. A Germanic commander removed the last Western emperor. No dramatic final siege, no apocalyptic collapse, just a quiet administrative replacement. For most ordinary people, life continued. Taxes were collected. Harvests were planted. Local disputes mattered more than the name of a distant ruler. Meanwhile, the Eastern Empire, centered in Constantinople, continued for nearly another 1,000 years. Civilization didn't end, but the Western Roman state had lost the cohesion it needed to sustain itself. Empires rarely fall from a single blow. They weaken through accumulated strain. Currency loses credibility. Administration grows heavy. Politics fracture. Civic identity thins. Then pressure arrives. And pressure reveals what was already true. The barbarians didn't create Rome's weakness. They exposed it. History doesn't repeat in perfect cycles, but large systems depend on trust, cohesion, and sustainable scale. When those erode, collapse is rarely dramatic. It is gradual, then sudden. By the time the gates finally opened, the fall had already happened.